My name is Mary Conquest. I'm your host for Safety Labs, the podcast where we explore the human side of safety to support safety professionals. We move past regulations and reportables to talk about the core skills of safety leadership: empathy, influence, trust, rapport. In other words, the soft skills that help you do the hard stuff. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Hi there. Welcome to Safety Labs. Safety is big. It's a big topic with a lot of different specialties, perspectives, initiatives, and research. And the variables don't end there because each organization has its own culture, leaders, set of ideas, and goals. It's hard to wrap your head around. Statistics and industry standards help because they give us a big picture of what's happening. But sometimes that big picture is so fuzzy that it's not particularly helpful. Today's guest has done a lot of thinking and research about how we track safety. How do we know how well we're doing? And what does well really look like? Hang on to your stats. We will get into it right away. Dr. Todd Loushine is an associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, teaching everything from basic OSHA compliance to advanced data analysis and research methods. Todd's career began with a BSc in chemical engineering, leading to work as an industrial hygiene engineer and compliance officer with Minnesota OSHA. He completed his PhD in industrial engineering in 2007 with emphases in psychology and sociology. Todd dedicates his energy to educating students on systematic work evaluation and organizational management to improve safety, productivity, and job satisfaction. In addition to recent work as an EHS manager, he's currently serving as a director at large on the ASSP Board of Directors. And Todd joins us from Whitewater, Wisconsin. Welcome.
Thank you. I just listening to that, I feel like I'm tired. So busy.
Yes. Okay, well, let's get into it. So one of the most common touch points in safety is the idea of sending people home safe at the end of the day. And that serves as a North Star for many safety professionals. But you have argued that this is a limited perspective on work and safety. So can you tell us more about that?
Yes, because that's that idea of sending somebody home at the end of the day in the same condition they came in, however variant you want to state it, does not take into account that the person can come to work and be very unsafe, be, putting themselves at risk all day, and then they still go home in the same condition. What have you done? My focus, what I would like to adopt is that we are efforting to get the worker to be as successful or as effective in their job as possible with as minimal risk as possible. And hopefully they elicit some form of satisfaction or pride in the work they do. That's something I can attend to each day. And if I have those three goals in mind, I'm more likely to send them home at the end of the day. But at the same time, I'm also attending to their original charge, which is to get the job done. And I think we all know that if people take pride in their work or enjoy what they do, they will tend to go above and beyond. And therefore, those are the three things that I focus on.
You're obviously not arguing to ignore hazards, but you have said that maybe we focus on them too much.
Expand.
Can you elaborate?
Can you elaborate on that?
Please.
No, you're right. No,
Thanks.
let's go to the next topic. Exactly. As you had stated in my introduction, I started with OSHA, Minnesota OSHA specifically. And I was taught safety from the perspective of compliance. Visual hazard identification, comparison to a standard, recommended solution. What I found through my experience, and then went to grad school because of it, that it's not just focusing on a hazard, just trying to correct a hazard may actually mitigate, prevent, or inhibit the worker from getting their job done. And if the solution is to do that, the worker will have to make a choice: get the job done unsafe, or be safe and maybe not get the job done as fast or to the level in which was originally designed. And there was a study that was published, and I had to review this for a class in graduate school. And it was like I found plutonium by accident that it was in 2003. It was, I think Patrick Cox et al. And what they did is they were testing a new methodology, which was fantastic, and it was a just sort of a decision process, a mental model, I believe is the term they used, and they took 2 different types of scenarios. One was a dry cleaning, so therefore it was dry cleaning chemicals. The other had to do with, lead-based solder, and they did the mental models for a safety professional versus the worker, and what they found is the safety professional focused purely on controlling the hazard and thought, I'm awesome." The worker thought about the job first and tried to mitigate what the exposure might be, but focusing on the job first. That completely changed how I practice, how I research, how I teach. And then also just by and large, I was also studying as an industrial engineer. Therefore, I focus on the design of work, the work system itself. If we're only looking at one aspect of it, we may find a solution and it may be successful. And I think listeners would agree, yeah, well, this was the problem, this was the fix. But isn't that kind of like, my car isn't running well, so I'll change the oil. But what if changing the oil wasn't the real issue? You're not really studying what the issue is. That maybe the solution is actually inhibiting what the correction should be. And therefore, I like to I think it was Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, who said, "If a problem seems too difficult to resolve, I widen the viewpoint of it." And I think that's what we're doing. That's what I'm recommending rather, is that let's study the entirety of the work. The workers involved with the hardware they're using, the software they're using, the environment they're in, the social they're in, the organizational influences. All these things contribute to how they get the job done. And if we ignore them, we're putting ourselves in a position that the solution we're recommending, though we're trying to actually help, isn't really helping. And then let's say then they get hurt. Well, then now we blame them for not doing what we had prescribed, yet we didn't fully understand that it got in the way or was congruent with what the work goals were. And so that's what I mean by that is that I feel that if we narrow our focus on just the hazard, we're not understanding the totality of it. And I believe some of the earlier safety research violates that. That if you only ask people about safety, they're now placing it or isolating it from all the influences that affect it. And I had done a study in which we interviewed top management, middle management, or supervisors, excuse me, and workers about safety of the work. And here's the thing, I didn't ask about safety. The workers were not sort of prepositioned that this is a safety study, it was a work study. And I let safety introduce itself naturally. After the first day of interviews, it wasn't. That injuries were expected as part of the job. So we had to change our script to try to find out where it would come into play. And that was one of the main findings of that paper, that study, is that in I was gonna say comparison. In competition, when safety is in competition for getting work done, it will lose. But if we approach issues, whether you wanna call them risks, whether you wanna call them hazards, within sort of the I hate to say this too much, but the construct or the context of work, we're more likely to, 1, come up with solutions that actually are better, more functional and customized. But also then we're reducing the chance of the worker being able to decide whether to use it or ignore it.
It sounds to me like empathy when you think about designing work to be safe, focused simply on hazards. It's because you're looking at it from a safety lens. But if you ask the workers, you realize they're not looking at it from a safety lens, right? So it's really, yeah, it's widening your view to a different mental model is what I'm
100%.
understanding.
Yes. And what's so interesting is this morning I was shoveling my driveway and I was thinking about this. And I was contemplating, I had watched my earlier video and I was thinking that how many safety professionals default to apathy when they practice, and how workers can observe that. They feel that either they're not being cared for, and how now the communication is affected, you're not going to talk to someone who doesn't care about you, especially when it's personal stuff. And I think safety is very personal. And then that goes to supervisors, that goes to middle managers. I mean, even in my profession, teaching, if I'm showing apathy towards the students, why would they ask for clarification? It becomes a battle, and and so you're exactly correct in saying that this is very much pursuing empathy for the worker, and by just changing the perspective, changing the goal of a worker being successful in their job, but doing it with as minimal risk as possible. I'm saying this because I believe very importantly that ergonomic and overexertion issues are always there. Slip, trips, and falls are always there. Um, but that they could be successful and we're part of that effort. That should help them to if their primary charge is getting the job done, we're helping with that. Boom, good. But the supervisor also, boom, they're getting the job done. Middle management, operations, boom, we're getting the job. You see that it aligns our work with the organization's efforts and goals. Now we're better able to align the work we're doing with strategic goals. I feel like, okay, I'm lecturing, and so, but yeah, long story short, I truly believe empathy is the proper term, and we should also then speak to the dangers of apathy in practice.
Yeah, and I'd like I'd like to come back to that a little bit later, apathy and, um, safety in terms of the larger organization, but before I do, I wanted to also ask about your thinking that's focused on safety metrics. So, I know that you're interested in, for lack of a better term, the human side of safety. So, how do you think of something sort of as typically seen as dry as record keeping? How does it kind of relate to the human side of safety and the soft skills? Where's the interplay there?
The interplay comes from OSHA record keeping. I teach it. That's how I learned it. There are certain qualifications of an incident that make it recordable. But what I found is that having an incident result in a severity that meets those qualifications is somewhat infrequent. I was going to say rare, but it's not. It's infrequent. However, incidents that could have resulted in something of that level of severity will either be a near miss or a first aid, which is not considered OSHA recordable. Those happen a lot more often, more frequently. And we learn that from Heinrich. Bird replicated it. Others have too. In my stint, my year and a half stint, in which I was an EHS manager, I converted their reporting system to include observations, concerns, near misses, first aids. What I received in that first year, I received over 100 of those compared to the 8 recordables. And what I did, I approached each one the same way to understand what allowed it to the exposure or the observation to occur, and then investigated it, and then improved the design of work. It made improvements through the lens of work improvement, and that's what I believe led to the reduction in injuries. That I was each opportunity, it's to improve the design of the work, the performance of the worker. And if I only had 8, and here's the thing too, in the investigation, we have a natural tendency as humans to blame. That's attribution error. And if therefore I'm trying to correct the worker and not the elements which allowed the worker to be exposed to it, it remains. And I forget which researcher, whether it was Decker or Holnagel or Conklin, who said, if someone gets injured and you take them out, you blame them and you put a new worker in. Would they not make the same decisions, exhibit the same behaviors that led to it? I say yes. People tend to be somewhat predictable in their behavior. That's what I've learned from my studies. If you understand what to look for. And so when it comes to metrics, if we're only looking at things that meet a certain qualification, that's a very limited view. Oh, we brought that up earlier about limited view or limited perspective. And let's take it to the nerd level now, everybody. And that is the idea of running statistics, saying that the average cost of a workers' compensation claim is this amount, or the average rate is this number. Here's the thing. We're ignoring this massive chunk of the distribution. If you're going to report or perform any form of parametric statistics, you must first establish normality. And for the fellow nerds out there or the non-nerds, normality is essentially the bell curve. The bell curve, because almost all statistics are predicated on that basic distribution, you know, equal or even distribution, because the calculation of mean standard deviation predicates a certain percent of that population or sample falls within a certain percent. And by having that, you can now run certain types of calculations to determine what is an acceptable result in a comparison of two samples or after a treatment. Matt Law probably covered this in his, because he and I talked about it in his webcast or his podcast. Here's the thing. If you include the near miss, the first aid, everything that could cause it, we no longer have a skewed or a ketosis population statistic. We have an asymptote, which asymptote, for those of you who like math, as x goes to 0, y goes to infinity. As x goes to infinity, y goes to 0. I have run this distribution. I don't even want to count how many times. If I had a dime for every time I do, I could retire. It's always an asymptote. Always. And the average or the mean and the median, which is the 50th percentile, which they're supposed to be this really close to the same if you have a normal curve, but they're so distant, they're so different that we have to stop using average. And I was trained. I used to train people that calculate your incidence rates, total case, or people some people call it an incident rate, or some people call it a severity rate, or DART rate, whatever it is, lost workday rate, and let's compare it to the Bureau of Labor Statistics average. Do you know how wrong that is? And here's the other thing too. They report things from an industry perspective. We're individual companies. Yes, we're an individual company within an industry, but the problem is calculated as an industry. We should only be comparing industry to industries. Another issue with safety and culture is there was a paper that came out by Denise Rosso that talked about issues with doing studies within levels within an organization. And some things are not comparable. So comparing your company to your industry, first of all, it's not an average. It doesn't really mean much because the median and the mean, or the median and the average, are so different that we have all these outliers, and we're not talking about the zeros. We have a basement effect in our data set. And it's not a common thing in the real world. I was looking for something comparable, and like salaries are one that you can look at. So, within a society, what is the spread as far as wealth? And there are a few. Yeah, do you see what I mean? It's the same thing.
So the story is really like that. If you give an average of wealth, you're going to have probably much higher, because there's people on the low end, but the people on the very high end, there's now a trillionaire on the planet. That's really going to skew so it tells a different story, right? It tells a story that isn't accurate and that isn't helpful.
Right. And so if we're asking the question, how is our safety program performing? And we have these lagging metrics, incidence rates, average work comp claim, whatever, and we compare it to an industry average. What are we really comparing it to? It's not valid. And so you may ask, well, okay, so what am I supposed to compare it to? You should compare it to how you were last year. But and the thing is too, you have to come up with better metrics. The more you search for better measures, more realistic measures, that effort in itself gives you insights that you never had before, because you made the assumption that this metric, this number compared to this industry-wide thing is valid and makes us look good. Now, what should we do? Here's what I teach my students. You have to provide a more fuller picture. Let's look at the distribution. Let's see what percent are really, really high numbers and why are they so high. Let's look at the zeros. What's interesting about them? And so I teach my students how to identify outliers, and we study the outliers. And what we have found, and I don't mean to offend any of the SIFs people out there, is that we found that the most expensive claims come out of normal work. There was no unique or extreme or insignificant that led to these really expensive things. It was the expense was because of the treatment and not so much the exposure. And what do I mean by that? Well, my most expensive claim when I worked for that company for a year and a half was a slip, trip, and fall, and the person hurt their wrist in trying to catch themselves. Lesson learned, kids. Learn to roll, tuck and roll. And here was the thing. We tried pain mitigation through prescription and physical therapy. It wasn't working. So then they upped it to a surgery, which we all know is expensive because there's recovery afterwards. There was an infection from that surgery. So now they had to go back for a second surgery. That extent because of going in there twice, there was an extension of the recovery. And so it took a lot longer than originally anticipated. So it went from probably what should have been, a wrap and recover in light duty to over a year of physical therapy and restricted duty and all this other stuff became very expensive. Normal thinking would say, preventative management, like, oh my gosh, $120,000. We got to focus on this. It was a slip, trip, and fall, and the person tried to catch themselves. It was something that happens all throughout the day, every day. We all go through it, especially when there's ice outside. How we can designate lanes, and try to keep the floor clear, but stuff like that is going to happen. And so when we think of the extremes or the outliers, I don't think that that fully provides us everything we need. I like the idea of CIS because what we're doing is we're classifying things that didn't result in something severe as really important because it could have. And if that gets management's attention, if that drives corrections that haven't really resulted in something that we can, put our finger on yet, I think that's fantastic. And that's why I support it. But some of the foundational modeling that I've seen out there, I believe is incorrect, where they superimpose the fatality rate and the total case incidence rate. If you were to actually put them on the same scale, one would be way up here, one would be dwarfed, and you wouldn't be able to see it. And I believe I believe honesty in presentation is what is so important here. And that's what it really comes down to is if we knew the median, if we knew the mean, and we saw how different they were, and we saw the extreme outliers, we saw all the zeros, then I think we'd be in a better position to really understand that the best comparison is where we were before. How did we improve? What did we learn? Which actually that was a common theme in my last recording was the importance of learning. What did we try? What worked? What do we have to refocus on? That's where I believe the metrics could be. What if, and I'm gonna postulate here if I had my druthers, what if the record keeping wasn't about what went wrong, but how companies responded to it? If we were to use these metrics as a judgment on whether we want to hire or contract a company or give them an award, what if it wasn't what happened, but how they responded to it and how they measured and tracked whether it was effective? To me, that's a much better predictor that they're going to be a good client to have or a good contractor to have or a good person to work with. I know that the work I've done for, at universities for accreditation, it's not that you're perfect, but rather the system that's in place to evaluate whether how you're teaching and how students are responding to it. And I think just by thinking about that and coming up with better ideas of what our measures is the way to go. Let me go into another story. We survey our students at the end of each semester. And I provide student points for participating in that, not bonus points, but actual points for the course, because I really want to know how things went. Here's what I found: the questions we're asking aren't the right questions. It should be not that they're learning, not they enjoyed it, not that things were explained well, or what was my enthusiasm, but did it change their thinking? Do they see that they could take what they learned in my class and apply it to their practice, to their life? Because I asked that. I asked that in my own weekly assignments, and in my own internal pre and post surveys. I think that better measures what's going on. If we're really only taking one perspective, and the old adage, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it," I I'm from that generation, is wrong. we have to understand how things are being performed. And if something does go wrong, if something doesn't look right, let's look into it. Let's understand it more. I'm a bit because of my empathetic approach to my practice, I am upset that we don't fully understand the numbers and the statistics we're currently using. And it's nobody's really at fault. It's just that if you really get down into and start really analyzing the numbers and what they represent, we're misinformed. I think that's the gentlest way I could put it, is that we're a bit misinformed, and sometimes we think we're doing well and we're not, and sometimes we think we're doing poorly when we're actually doing well.
So I want to layer that with you're talking about how industry standards are not useful. And I think what you're suggesting is, and I think one of the reasons for that, you haven't mentioned it, but I know that you think about it, is different sizes of organization. Like every organization is different. You know, a biotech company, are they in the medical industry or in the tech industry? Or yeah, I'm sure that other people have thought about this, but when you layer the unique challenges with this idea that industry standards aren't super useful with what you just said, which is essentially the search for meaningful statistics is the learning. The act of finding out which metrics will be useful for your organization is what you need to do in order to find out. Does that sound accurate to what you're saying?
That's yes, and so can I prescribe a set of newer, more leading types of metrics? I can talk about different things, but each company is so different, and but just I just wanna kinda preface this. I'm not saying get rid of incidence rates. I know there are people on LinkedIn hollering for the cancel of them, and then people jump on them, and yeah, we talked about that last time. I still think we can use them, but I think we need to use them in an intelligent way and not put so much weight into what they really mean. Back to what you were just talking about. I mean, in all aspects of my work, my volunteer leadership and everything else, I believe, so we can talk about the definition of things and whether it's like a goal or something. I need to know how it's measured because I believe that provides a dimension that helps me understand the definition of it. So really, what we're leading to right now is what is safety? That was kind of the first one. What is it? Is it do we have it when no one gets hurt? I think most people would say, well, that's traditional, sure. It's part of the picture, but the thing is, what do you do to get there? And you made me think of sports. Maybe that's something that people can relate to. My Wisconsin Badgers had a bad year, and right away when the win loss column is imbalanced, people blame the coach. They blame the players. But I think those of us who enjoy competition and enjoy sports know that there are more intricacies. How what are we doing in practice? How are we performing given the skill level, performance level of the people we have? How does our play calling in our response to how things are going within a competition, how are we adjusting to it? I think is a better measure, is a more pragmatic representation of performance, not just a win loss. In safety, our win loss is injury rates, work comp claims. But if we really want to improve, the performance should be part of the effort to improve, to learn. What are those measures? That's the big question. For me, when I worked at that job for a year and a half, I did ratios of things, ratios of reports to corrections, how long it took me to correct certain things. I mean, I could have measured positive interactions versus negative interactions. I know there are some experts out there who talk about that. I know Jason Coons has a great story about that as well. The things we're doing to improve and how we're taking a learning and empathetic approach, things are going to improve when you apply that. Now, measures within that cycle of things would be really interesting, but I think over time, what we'd find is the measures that we currently hold in such high regard are going to go down. But let's not judge ourselves just on that, because that is such a after effect, such a it's not direct. There are other things that contribute to whether these measures work or not, or these outcomes are negative or not. I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
So, given that, and given the sports analogy, am I accurate in naming you the Ted Lasso of safety?
Oh, I would be honored for I don't like to take, titles that I didn't earn, but yeah, I think being positive and trying to improve it, and here's the thing too, I'm not just I actually just helped a company a couple months ago explain to top management that you shouldn't be using severity rate and things like that, that there are things that are going on out in the field. The more they do of it, the better things are gonna get. And the more workers are engaged, the more we better understand to come up with solutions that are gonna be more effective. And I explained that to management, and it was based on a paper I published in Shift last year. It was based on a presentation I gave with Safety on the Edge. I gave an updated version with, Safety Connect, and so it's resonating. I think people are starting to understand it, but it's a flavor or a approach that not everybody is comfortable with yet.
I wanted to ask about that, about the paper. It was called Proposal for a Better Record Keeping Standard. That was a few months ago, and this is sort of a multi-phase project. So I did want to get specifically into that. So first of all, what was the impetus? Why did you feel that this was the area that you wanted to look at specifically? Like, you have ideas about it, but was there an incident? Was there a moment when you thought, this is where I need to look?
My career began with me traveling around the state of Minnesota, training people how to properly fill out a 300 log. I'm sorry, back then it was a 200 log for those of us who are that old. And I thought that just by completing an incident investigation, in order to meet 29 CFR 1904, you were doing a diligent job. But by listening to employers, presenting and hearing people, that drove me to try something different. And it wasn't until I was in grad school and I took over the mantle of running the record keeping for the Wisconsin Department of Health and Family Services that I started really understanding what it meant. That there were details you had to read between the lines. And so I completely changed that system. And I changed the incident investigation, and I trained people to not to blame the worker. Don't ever do that. Let's find out what else could have contributed. I standardized entries. The numbers increased, but they got better, and we got insight to things that allowed us to triage and focus on certain things. And that drove things down. It actually worked. Then I got out of grad school and I started analyzing big data sets. And that's where I noticed that we violated normality and how important, how critical that is with doing statistics. And because I'm an Excel nerd, yes, on the weekend in my limited discretionary time, I will download data sets and analyze them for fun. I know that sounds sad, but I love doing it. I just get giddy. I found that being honest and really understanding the what goes into the numbers. And actually, that was a lesson learned in grad school that I learned how to do, like, what does he call structural equation modeling and things like that. I looked at it, I'm like, man, that is so out there. Can I simplify the design of my studies so a simple ANOVA, a simple regression, where I can actually graph it and look at it and make understanding of it visually, is that just a better way to go? And that's what I agreed with, that simplification so that there isn't this complexity, and that complexity may actually be leading you to thinking something is true when it's not. And I'm starting to get into the whole hypothesis, something like that. But I want to get back to it, that I have to be able to look at the numbers and understand what they mean. And then because I've been out there on the floor talking to people and seeing how it is, that OSHA record keeping is not the full picture. Not even close. And the assumptions we make that it represents the work we do in safety is not even close. And therefore, I need to do the work to try and educate people so they understand that, and they can teach that to management so that management understands that. And now I'm analyzing, this is kind of sad. I'm analyzing now whether smaller entities are actually receiving the 70% reduction they're supposed to receive when they get an OSHA citation. Hint, they're not. I'm also comparing smaller companies to larger companies on incidence rates. There's not a big difference. And people might say, well, that's curious. It is, because larger companies have access to resources that small companies do not. So why is it so similar? And why does it go up when you get sort of into a mid-range size company? Because they're going through growing pains. I think it's the better communication, more empathetic approach to work in smaller companies. As they grow and get bigger into mid, they're going through growing pains. But then as they start getting the resources for larger companies, now it's coming back down. So we've got almost like a reverse U. And those of you who do research and read research papers know that there's a lot of inverse U patterns, especially when we're talking about small, mid, and large size companies. And just understanding how companies view record keeping, incidence rates. There's a desire to underreport, to look better than you are. And is that benefiting? And what my paper that was published in Shift last year showed is that the biggest issue with record keeping is that people don't know how to report hours worked. That the basic assumption, and that's given to us through OSHA and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is each worker puts in about 2,000 hours, give or take, right? And then we have non-static workforces. So we have different employee numbers. We have some come, some go. Some are part-time, some are not, depending on what type of entity you are. And being able to determine what hours worked are in order to calculate the incidence rate. If it doesn't fall within a particular, range, whether it's 1,600 hours per year, maybe 2,100 hours, if it doesn't fall within there, then what is it? And when I analyzed the OSHA ITA data, which anybody can download in a zip file and look at, what I found is that some companies were reporting that each worker put in an hour a year. Yes, yes, I did see that. Some reported that, 0 employees, all kinds of hours, or 0 hours, all kinds of employees. Didn't make any sense. Had to throw those out. Some are just so extraneously low, they're not believable. Some are so high, they're unbelievable. Did you know that in 2019, a company reported that each worker put in 4.2 trillion hours that year? That's what really drove. That's why we looked into it. We found that 13% of the companies that are supposed to upload their data to the OSHA ITA site, 13% are incorrect. They're unusable data. Why is that? If in our jobs we committed errors 13% of the time, we wouldn't be employed for very long. And I think we need to understand better what the numbers really mean and really get away from this idea that let's just track the negatives. Let's not, we're focusing so much on the win-loss record. There's something called building. And to be honest, to be empathetic, to improve upon oneself based on the way things were just previously, I think is the metrics that should be implemented. Maybe even more importantly, and this came out of my presentation on a better system, is what if now we started developing databases of things that worked, that in response to this type of laceration, this worked really well. We have these great safety cutting tools, hashtag shameless plug, that prevented people from getting lacerations and injuries. That, this particular type of response or approach to overexertion injuries are actually functionally working. That this is lowering slip, trips, and falls in construction. Every year, all we're talking about is the most frequently cited standards. We're talking about the most expensive types of work comp claims. We're talking about the most frequent types of injuries and causes of death. What have we learned? I feel like we're not learning. Okay, you talked about passion, and that's my passion.
All right. So one of the things is, what are we measuring? Why are we measuring it? What are the assumptions behind it? And surprise, they're wrong. Many of them. So that's one piece, I think, is improving record keeping, not only what we measure, how we measure, why we measure. But I also wanted to talk about another part of your work, Lots of safety professionals I speak with bemoan the fact that safety is often viewed as work that happens in a silo. So, one of the things you have suggested is that safety should be more integrated in other areas of the business and other areas of education. What areas of business, let's say? Where should safety not exactly sit on the org chart, but where should it be closely aligned with? And also, how can we work on it in the educational realm?
Great question. And I'm fine with using the term org chart. I think safety should be in operations. So plant management, production. I mean, I know sub departments there. You will have like maintenance in there. You'll have process engineers. You'll have production engineers, shift management. That's what I was able to practice in. So I had hands on. I experienced what it's like to be in an organization, and they had recently just shifted it from HR, which is I think where you find it a good percent of the time in human resources. I have anyway. And, but I believe that operations, because of my focus on approaching safety through the lens of work, that's where it fit for me, from my perspective. I did, I said, I should have done that. I did work with HR on certain projects, particularly when it came to workers' compensation. We would meet regularly to talk about it, to make sure the bills were paid and people were taken care of and they could come back and heal. But operations, because of the measures, I was able to find correlation and alignment on downtime of machines with workers, with environmental conditions, how the machines work, how the workers work. It was all intertwined. And I took every opportunity to educate those individuals, the shift managers, the production engineers, the process engineers, maintenance, to give them examples of how tending to or considering safety within the context of the work they do, it improves not only the work they're doing, but the result of it and how it affects the workers, and then therefore their ability to get things done. And they understood it. And it just made it more enjoyable that in an operations meeting, so typically if safety is siloed, they're like, okay, safety, report to us what's going on. And it's just talking about, I did these audits. This is who got hurt, blah, blah, blah. What I was able to do is I would talk about what I was doing, but speak to it in the language of management and maintenance and shift work. And then when they presented, they also agreed with or conferred with what I had said. And so the entire meeting wasn't just, oh, safety was brought up at the beginning and now we don't have to talk about it, but it was referred to throughout. And that I mean, it made it so much easy. I was going to say easier. It made it more pleasurable for me, that other people understood that people getting the job done with a minimal risk and hopefully a list of satisfaction made everybody's job better and made our numbers better. Let's transition to education here. I do think that business students, and I'm housed in a business school, need some form of education when it comes to the importance of a worker getting a job done safely, and that it's not just about, if somebody gets hurt, don't blame them. They didn't get hurt on purpose. It wasn't a conscious thing that woke up today. Yeah, I want to cut off a finger today or want to fall off a building today. It's part of the job. And that by including the worker to understand work as done versus work as planned, which a lot of people assume that they know everything and work is done is the way it should be. If they really understood the intricacies, the details that happen with people every day in and day out, and they can be successful, get their job done effectively, that they are given not only the knowledge and skills, but the ability and the acknowledgement to be not, is it versatile? There's a better word for that, to be able to react, to adopt, so that they can get the job done, but then maintain a certain minimal level of risk. Um, the whole company does better. Everybody's meeting numbers and they're happy about it. And oh, they had to deal with this issue, but they dealt with it and we still met numbers. We should celebrate the ability to be resilient. That's the term I was looking for. The ability to be resilient and get things done in the face of volatility and change, unexpected things. Uh, that's what a true successful business is. I know there are businesses out there who aren't challenged. I mean, they can. It's pretty. Things are pretty static. They just get it all done. Say to people like nobody got hurt, and they're doing a great job. Same thing in sports. Some teams have all the talent in the world and a really easy schedule, and we're celebrating them being the best. And then you got other teams who are building, and they don't have all the talent, but they're showing improvement each week. And so I think that needs to be acknowledged. I think we're too dichotomized in our society and our human thinking that success means you're the best. That the lack of negative means you're the best. And in safety, we can't afford that type of backward thinking.
So if you did, I give you a magic wand and you get safety introduced into a business degree curriculum, what would that look like? What would you like it to look like?
I would like them to first understand that it's not about compliance. I think everybody who's listening right now who works in safety, somebody goes, "Oh, what do you do?" "I work in safety." "Oh, OSHA?" Or, whatever regulatory. That's the limited viewpoint. We need a good, like, TV series where there's a safety professional solving things and everybody loves them. That would help us out tremendously. We're like the best kept secret ever.
The
But
great
what would it
the
look
great
like? It is
great
to
bake off?
guess, I don't
The great safe off?
something, right? Is that it's not about compliance. It's about people. And that when people get hurt, there is an effect. And there's different levels of exposure that result in something severe, and that their decision making can affect how workers view their work, how they whether they're going to report when something isn't going right or try to handle it on their own, that they take risks in order to get work done. And that should not be the norm. That just because nothing went wrong today doesn't mean everything went right. I just I know that they're required to take some coursework in organizational psychology, which I think is fantastic, but I think they need to understand it from the point of the behavior you're observing is more resultant of the environment you've created than the individual making decisions. And that time and resource and money needs to be invested in improving, a constant improvement and a constant understanding, because if you don't do that, what you're basically doing is you're planning for the big disaster or big accident to happen, because it's going to if you're not attempting to control and understand how people are working, how machines are working. It they're willing to pour all kinds of money into preventative maintenance plans. Safety is kind of a human preventative maintenance plan, if you wanna be honest. I see a lot of similarities in the design of those programs and how they track them. And, we're almost getting into the point where I had it on my board, but I erased it because it's not a fully understood concept yet, but viewing safety as a disruptor. Unexpected, undesired, interruption in the work. And if we were to put it in that context as a disruptor, and if a management understood that somebody gets hurt, it disrupts things. Not just they can't work, it affects their coworkers in which they're friends. Now we're taking more of an empathetic, perspective on it. That the supervisor is required to do something. HR is required to do something. It's a disruptor. And if we can mitigate the things that lead to that, all the better. But more importantly, let's not beat up anybody or blame anybody when something bad does happen. It's a disruptor. Let's try to figure out what we can do to prevent that disruptor from reoccurring. And I think we kind of already do that, but again, we're so focused on just the hazard or just wearing the PPE or just doing the work as trained. And we don't know everything. There's a lot of things going on out on the production floors or out on the job site that we don't know anything about. The workers do. And we need to understand it from the perspective of how it's affecting to get their job done, because that puts them in a position to make a decision whether they're going to get it done or they're going to do it safely to get it done. And I think again, that's my, if I could wave the magic wand, ultimately, if business students were to take a course, and this is HR, this is supply chain management, all that stuff, understand that at the end of the day, It's about getting the job done as safe as possible. And hopefully they take pride and satisfaction in their work, and how their role contributes to that and how they respond to disruptions really defines what I guess many would call the culture, which I don't like to use that term unless we're talking about learning culture. And then I'm 100% in with that. But again, magic wand is to understand the basics, and it's more about the social psychological for management and management students than it is about the technical. Technical is going to come from working with engineering within operations, but still, what's misunderstood is the social, I guess, is what people label it as.
I'm sort of picturing a safety professional as like the both the workforce and the management whisperer, like someone in between who's, who's transforming, who's translating so that everyone's speaking in the same language, essentially.
So just yesterday, I was on a call and somebody was asking me to kind of describe my approach to things. And I kind of blurted out, I didn't really think of it until I had said it, and I've been thinking about it ever since, is that, like, when I worked at that company, I was a mood manager. That sounds weird, but I do it here. I do it in the classroom where if somebody's having a bad day, or obviously they're reacting to something that bad that's happened, and they unleash, yell, whatever, you know, when I can speak to them afterwards, I'm like, "Are you okay?" I did that a lot. And what it did is it helped, lower their anxiety, their stress, and allows them to refocus on what's important. So, in work, high stress, something's not going right, you can easily succumb to apathy and yell and blame and hope that it gets taken care of. But the way in which you react to things actually dictate how they can be resolved, or whether they actually get resolved, or if people just put up with. And I think that, yeah, I think in safety, we can be mood managers. I think anybody can, but I think we're in a great position to not overreact to things, not react in a negative way, but to approach things with curiosity and empathy. God, I'm sounding so touchy feely, but in my practice, in my experience, I get more satisfaction out of it in helping people lower their anxiety, their stress, to try to approach things more balanced and with an empathetic view. I feel like you're reacting in a better way, and so you're not putting a negative connotation on it, on your title or what you do, so that people are more likely to speak to you. They're gonna speak to you if they trust you, and if your reaction is to blame and to yell, they're less likely to risk themselves in sharing things with you, and sometimes that information is so important. And so I do believe, like, kind of what you had said, being able to help people bring down their temperature level is really important. And I think it fits in perfectly with what we've been talking about for this whole session.
So last time we spoke, I asked you this question, and I'm going to ask you again in case the answer is any different. Maybe it's the same. If you could go back in time to the beginning of your safety career, is there a piece of advice that you might give to yourself?
Well, because I was born out of compliance, I probably would have told myself that it's not about compliance, that is a small piece of the puzzle, that it's a technical aspect. But, in my older age, I know sometimes we have to gain our experiences and be able to look back and grow from it. And in education, I've been trying to explain to people, it's very layered. You can't just teach people hop and expect them to be successful. They have to understand the work that went into building up to that concept. Some people say you gotta learn to stand before you walk before you run, run before you fly, and I believe it's that way in safety too, that would I change anything? No. I had to go through and do the wrong things, make mistakes, and be willing to admit to those and grow. So, and I wish that for I think everybody, that whether however you get into this field, whether you're the one who knows how to order the gloves and now you're the safety person, or you go get a degree, that you understand that you're going to experience things in your career and it's not right. You're not always right. But one thing you can do is be empathetic, be a mood manager, and be able to try to get the workers to be successful in their work and to teach others about that of the importance of that and helping them be successful and being their mood managers. Sometimes people just need to vent. Let them. That's cathartic. And if you're the person that people go to for that catharsis, you're going to learn a lot, and you're not only you're gaining a better perspective on the work that's going on, you're gaining a perspective on people. And no, none of us can ever get enough of that. We tend to learn how to better foster good relationships at the end of our lives, which if we could have learned that when we were younger and not deal with all that drama, junior high drama, oh man, we'd be in a much better place. But yeah, that's what I wouldn't do it any differently, but other than maybe key a little bit sooner into the bigger effect, a different perspective and how it's practiced.
Are there any resources that you would recommend to our listeners that if they want to learn anything more about anything that we've spoken today, or even just, great books, websites, organizations?
I've been asked by multiple places to publish a book. I've been a little bit busy. I'm on LinkedIn a lot, and I like to, communicate with people through there. So by all means, you can find me there. I think whatever people have access to. Like I participated in Safety on the Edge, and I think Corey's doing a great job with that group. Safety Connect, um, uh, Jamie and Scott are doing a fantastic job. By the way, this podcast I've been listening, and I mean Ron Gant, Matt Law, just I these are people that I bring into my classes, guest speak, because of how great they are. Going to local meetings or conferences, there is more opportunity out there than people know, and I think it starts with, the virtual LinkedIn, and I see what's going on in the world. It gives I think Ben Hutchinson does a great job of sharing more recent research. I even enjoy reading The Dissenting, I'm not gonna say their names, but I learn a little bit more too when they poo-poo something. That's being kind. So LinkedIn. Otherwise, you guys just watching this, checking out these either online or local conferences or professional development, super important. I do believe that your net worth is your network. So grow it. Focus on growing it every day, and hopefully you have your own board of directors, your mentors. I've got some fantastic mentors, and I think that's really important with professional growth. I don't think I'd be where I am today if it wasn't for people guiding me and helping me out when I needed it.
Well, that is all the time we have today, folks. Thank you for joining us, Todd.
Thank you.
Thank you to our listeners. As you may have picked up, this is actually the second time Todd has been on the Safety Labs podcast. So if you want more Todd, check out episode 74. It's entitled Safety is a Team Sport. Come find us on LinkedIn to discuss the topics we covered today and to share your thoughts on moving the safety profession forward. My thanks to the Safety Labs team for all the behind-the-scenes logistics, editing, and writing. Bye for now. This podcast is created by Safety Products Global, the world's leading manufacturer of safety knives. Through our trusted brands, Clever, Slice, and PHC, we empower companies to prevent injuries by providing safer cutting tools for every material and application. Until next time, stay safe.